Welcome, welcome, my foolish mortal friends. Welcome to the 2024 Samhain Special. Ooh, we're being spooky in honor of the veil thinning and of all the ghouls and goblins, the ghosts and the spirits and the entities roaming about our earthly realm. Truly, this is the most wonderful night of the year. Or it would be if it were actually Samhain when I was recording this. But it will be when you are listening, unless you are a patron, at which point you could listen to this episode and even watch it 1 or 2 days early. Hello, welcome into my den of horror, my cauldron of calamity, my room of requirement. All that you need to enter is your soul. A small price to pay, really, for the entertainment and the camaraderie I bear to you, my friends. Today, on this most spooky of days, on this most frightening of nights, I come talking to you about a spectre, a ghost in a manner, a sort of cryptid. She is called Kuchisake Onna. Kuchisake Onna, really, not chi. You know what I mean. This entity is from Japan, whose name translates to split mouth woman or slit mouth woman, with kuchi meaning mouth, sake meaning split or cut, and onna meaning woman. At first glance, Kuchisake Onna is a beautiful woman, often wearing white clothing and with a pale complexion, much like yours truly, of course. Her hair is dark, long, and straight, and she has a cloth face mask that hides her nose and mouth, though sometimes, in some versions, it is actually a fan or a handkerchief that covers her nose and mouth. When she removes this obstruction from her face, it's revealed to her intended victim that a bloody gash or cut or slit crosses her face and stretches from ear to ear in what one may call a Glasgow smile. This entity is classified as a yurei, which is a faint spirit or ghost. There are plenty of kinds of yurei, and their appearances are dependent on their deaths. Usually, they're still wearing the clothing they died or were buried in, and look much like they did at the time of death. Yurei are translucent, so much so that they appear to be barely visible, barely able to be seen, and appear to have no feet, making it seem as though they are floating in midair. Their hands hang limply at their sides, and their hair is often long, messy, and obscuring part of their face. In traditional Japanese beliefs, when a person dies, their soul lives on as its own separate entity that passes on to the afterlife through a plethora of funeral and post funeral prayers and rites that person's loved one performs over many years. The deceased soul reunites with his ancestors and becomes a family guardian spirit. These ancestors have a dedicated shrine in the family's home where they're still honored as a part of the family. However, if a soul doesn't receive the proper funerary rites, they can't pass on and are stuck in limbo, simultaneously part of the physical plane and the spiritual one. Those who die tragically, violently, suddenly, or with malice or a grudge in their heart, sometimes can't pass on, even if the proper prayers and rites have been performed. It's these poor, unfortunate lost souls who become yurei. Kuchisake Onna tends to lurk at night on dimly lit roads, streets, and alleyways, and targets lone travelers or people. As a Yurei herself, sometimes it appears as though she pops out of thin air right before the person, and she asks her target, Watashi kire? Or am I pretty? Or am I beautiful? Now, should the individual that Kuchisake Onna picks out answers no, she kills them with whatever weapon she's carrying, which can vary from scissors to a scythe to a knife or even a machete, depending on the tale that you are told. If she's told yes, though, she removes her masks or what have you, like a fan or handkerchief, to reveal her mutilated mouth, and then asks, Kore demo, even now, or even with this? After removing her mask, if the individual screams or replies with a no, Fujisake Una will slice them in half or kill them with whatever weapon she has on hand. However, if the individual answers yes, she will slice their mouth from ear to ear, making it look just like hers. Some sources claim the legend of Kuchisake Onna stems back to Japan's Edo period, which began around 1603 and ended around 1868. But Ikura Yoshiyuki, who is a professor of oral literature and contemporary folklore at Kokugakuin University, postulates that the true origin actually dates back to the 1970s. A rumor started to circulate at the end of 1978 of an elderly woman spotting Kuchisake Onna standing in a corner of her garden in Yaotsu, which is a farming town in Gifu Prefecture. Once the local newspaper printed this woman's story, it grew and grew, particularly among children. By the following year, which, if we're keeping score, would be 1979, the story had spread nationwide, mainly due to word of mouth among school children. Now, you may be asking, and rightfully so, why? Why did this spread? Why was this even an issue to begin with? Well, it was not simply a legend to these school children. Many students then and now attend cram schools, which are basically specialized study schools seen primarily in Asian culture. And these schools start in the evening. This means that students wouldn't be leaving and going home until it was night. During the nighttime hours, these school children would encounter adults who were drunk or working nightly entertainment jobs, if you are catching my drift, or other people they normally wouldn't see and run into. That only exacerbated the anxiety they felt in regards to urban legends, such as Kuchisake Onna. Eventually, the rumors died down, However, Kuchisake Onna had already established herself in the culture. When told, her legend goes something like this. There was once a stunningly beautiful young woman who was the wife of a samurai. Though outwardly beautiful, the wife was considered vain. While her samurai husband was away from home fighting, the wife, possibly due to loneliness, started having affairs with the men in town. Word of her infidelity reached the samurai husband, and he was, how do you kids say it? Pissed? Yes, he was pissed. Now, to punish his wife, the samurai attacked her and sliced her mouth from ear to ear. After he had done so, he asked her, "Who will think you're pretty now?" In some versions of the story, the woman died shortly thereafter. Following her death, the woman became the vengeful spirit that we now know as Kuchisake Onna. Other versions of legend say that the woman was mutilated by another jealous woman who was so envious of the wife's beauty, or that it had been done during a dental or medical procedure. It's also been added that she has a mouthful of sharp teeth. That is her story. But what is one to do should they encounter Kuchisake Onna? Well, a person can escape her by telling her that they are running late, to which she'll bow, apologize, and let them pass. Now, this may seem odd to us, but we must understand that in Japanese culture, they are far more, how do I say this, polite, especially to other people, you may say. And holding someone up because they are running late simply will not do. Oh, no, 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 no. So she lets them pass because that would be just rude, holding someone up when they're already late for an engagement. Isn't that right, Douglas? Excuse me. Moving on from that, you can tell her that she is average or so so when she asks if she's pretty, as this tends to confuse or befuddle her, which allows the individual time to run away. One could also give or, unfortunately, throw money or bake ame, which is Japanese hard candy, at her, which causes her to pick it or them up to count them. Also, by saying pomade, what the fuck is this word? I don't know. Pomade 3 times, because apparently Kuchisake Onna dislikes the smell of it. It's some sort of wax or something. I don't know. I don't care. Just say it 3 times. She doesn't like it. But the final one that I have, the very last tactic one could implement to escape Kuchisake Onna, is to answer both of her questions with a yes, as there is a possibility that she'll leave the individual alone. Though, I must add, it's just as likely that she would follow the victim home and murder them in their sleep instead. So, maybe that's not one of the best tactics to use. Hmm? Kuchisake Onna is not only popular among school children as an urban legend, she is also a character in pop culture media. In film, she has appeared in the 1994 Studio Ghibli animated film Pom Poko. There was a live action short titled Kuchisake Onna by Teruyoshi Ishii in 1996. She was briefly mentioned in Hideo Nakata's 1998 film Ring, or Ringu, and Perhaps more notably, Kuchisake Onna is the primary antagonist of the 2007 film Carved, aka A Slit Mouthed Woman, and Kuchisake Onna, which was directed by Koji Shiraishi. This film was followed by Carve 2, The Scissors Massacre, aka Kuchisake Onna 2, and The Slit Mouthed Woman Zero, The Beginning, or Kuchisake Onna Zero, Beginning Gu, both of which released in 2008. In 2012, the film Kuchisake Onna Returns came out, as well as a found footage mockumentary called Shinritsu Kaiki File Kawasuki File 01, Operation Capture the Slit Mouthed Woman. As far as being present in literature, Kuchisake Onna appeared in Mob Psycho 100, which is a web comic. She is also the main female character in Even If You Split My Mouth, which is a manga by Akari Kojimoto, and also features in the manga Jujutsu Kaisen. The scissor woman enemy in the world of horror video game was inspired by Kuchisake Onna, and she has a strong two-phase enemy in the game Ghostwire Tokyo. Now, to conclude this topic, Kuchisake Onna has been seen as a cautionary tale for both children and adults alike. For kids, it is a tale that tells them to be careful around strangers. And for adults, it's an example of the consequences one can suffer when enacting revenge on another, and to consider those consequences closely, especially when one is emotionally distraught or compromised. She is also a reflection of the values the general public held during the time period when she was created, that vanity in a woman is frowned upon, that maintaining the home and caring for the family is a wife's duty, and that one should not disregard their duty. That's not my opinion. That's just what the research told me. Do not at me, new age, woke, hit fam, whatever. Ultimately, Kuchisake Onna and her story is a representation of femininity. Some view her legend as one about seeking approval for their urges, wants, and desires, but perhaps even more see her as a sovereign of her own sexual prowess and activities while rejecting the traditional female roles of wife and mother. To me, dear friends, while her visage and legend are frightening, Kuchisake Ona's tale represents how a traditional, out of date, often but not exclusively toxic male mindsets and old world beliefs were and still are threatened by powerful and confident women who are unapologetic with their sexual, financial, spiritual, and physical autonomy. It paints the samurai husband and those with like minded values in an unsavory light. Kuchisake Onna is frightening to many because of her power, strength, promiscuity, and beauty, who was mutilated for chasing after and obtaining her desires when her marriage left her unfulfilled and unsatisfied. Now, am I saying that it is okay to cheat on your partner? No, that is not what I'm saying at all. But it is not okay, in addition, to hurt your partner physically if they do. And that blame and punishment lands solely on Kuchisake Ona's shoulders is complete and utter bullshit. I hope that you enjoyed the topic of Kuchisake Onna. I hope that she has inspired you to stick it to the man, so to say. And I hope that you enjoyed my performance this evening. But we are not done yet, my friends. Oh, no, no. At this part of the vocal recording tract, I am going to insert a nice little treat for you. For my dear friend Shannon has decided to read to us some of her stories and some of her literature that, as a librarian to children in middle school and elementary school, she has expanded upon with. Now, while these stories may traditionally be for children, I can assure you that Shannon's performance is truly inspirational and, at the very least, will cause you to shiver in your boots. Without further ado, I present to you, my dear darling friends, Shannon and her spooky tales. Okay, so this is a test. Say something, Shannon.
Hello, hello, hello.
Alrighty, dighty dippity doo. I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna hit record. So, whichever one you would prefer.
We're going to do this one first.
Alrighty. Before you start, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure.
Awesome.
My name is Shannon, and I have been your friend for a short time, and hopefully it will last much longer.
Yeah. You can't get rid of me. I'm like the wart on your butt. Once I'm attached, I'm never going away unless you get plastic surgery.
Well, I've been warned.
Yeah, but that's expensive, so you're not going to.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, great. So what are you reading for us today?
I'm going to read Tell Me a Scary Story, but Not Too Scary, by Carl Reiner.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Do you know that name?
It sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. Say along.
Comedian.
Oh, yeah.
Right. His son, Rob Reiner. Oh, also an actor, a director, and so forth. So, shall we begin?
Yeah, let's begin. Don't mind my cat sniffing you.
All right. He writes, you know, when I was a boy, I lived in this neighborhood. A tall man moved into the house next door. I introduced myself and he smiled and said his name was John Nawala. I like people who smile, but I didn't like Mr. Nawala's smile. It was a crooked, mysterious smile. I stood behind a tree and watched him carry a large box into his house. Something shiny fell out and rolled across the street. It stopped at my feet and I picked it up and shoved it in my pocket and I ran home. I couldn't wait to see what it was. It was a marble, a strange marble. I stared at it and it stared back at me. I was a little scared. Well, not just a little scared. I was very scared because I knew I would never fall asleep until I returned it. So that night, at midnight, I got out of bed, dressed, and went over to Mr. Nawala's house. The house was dark except for a small light coming from the basement. I knelt down and looked in, and I saw something covered with a cloth. It looked like something really creepy, so I shut my eyes. I leaned in closer, but before I knew it, the window flew off its hinge, and I fell inside. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and there on a chair was that creepy thing covered with a cloth. I wanted to get out of there. Before I could get out, there was a voice behind me. What are you doing here? I turned and saw the smiling John Nawala. I was looking to see if you were home, I stuttered. I'm your neighbor. We met earlier. Yes, he said suspiciously. So why are you here now? Don't you know never to go into a stranger's house alone? Oh, I know. My mom and dad told me that, but I came to return this, I said, handing him the marble. He looked at the staring marble, and then he stared at me. It's a very interesting marble, I said. Indeed, he said, smiling his crooked smile. I have many interesting things. Would you like to see them? Be very careful, Mr. Nawala said, smiling that smile. The stairs are steep. I wouldn't want you to tumble down. He gave me a look that sent shivers down my spine. He took my arm and I grabbed the railing. The stairs creaked and the light got dimmer and dimmer. Mr. Nawala led me to his work table and then he turned on the light. There on the work table were hundreds of staring marbles, all staring directly at me. I felt like I was being watched by hundreds of cold, dead eyes. Do they look familiar? He asked. But before I could answer, he grabbed two of the marbles, and then he picked up something weird from under the black cloth and ran up the stairs. Don't move, he shouted. There's someone I want you to meet. And then he laughed maniacally and slammed the door. I was trapped. Suddenly the light went out, and I heard a door creak, and then strange, scary noises came out of the dark. Something with red beams of light shooting from its eyes was coming down the basement stairs. It came closer and closer, and the hair on the back of my neck was sticking straight out. Finally, I saw it, and it was alive. Are you scared? The creature asked. Yes, I screamed, and I ran to the stairs. Don't you have a question for me? The creature said, moving toward me. Yes, I said. What have you done with Mr. Nawala? I ate him, the creature laughed. He's inside of me. Would you like to see him? No, I yelled, and I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, but the door was locked. I threw myself against it, but it didn't budge. Stay, the creature commanded. Turn around and see what I've done to your neighbor, Mr. Nawala. I turned and saw the monster grasp his head and twist it. He struggled hard. He grunted. He groaned. It looked like he was trying to pull his head off. Yikes! I pounded on the door and I yelled, Help! Help! Stay! He screamed and started up the stairs. I couldn't breathe. The monster came closer and closer. Get me out of here! He shouted. No, I shouted back, pounding the door. I'm getting me out of here. No, the monster yelled, tugging at his neck. You must help me. What? I asked. This monster sounded strangely familiar now. Unstick this darn zipper! He screamed. So I pulled the monster's head and gave a frantic pull on the zipper, and there, as the head split open, was Mr. Nawala, safe and sound. It was just a costume. I scared you, didn't I? He asked. I feel silly, I laughed, weak with relief. Scaring people is what I do for a living, he said. Would you like to see my secret workshop? This isn't it? I asked. No, he said. Come on. Be careful, he warned, smiling his crooked smile. As I took my first step, he hit my shoulder and shouted, Hey! I screamed and went tumbling down, down, down. I landed hard on my bottom. Mr. Nawala came running at me. Don't come one step closer, I yelled, raising my fist. You pushed me! I tapped you, he explained, to tell you that your shoelace was untied. It was. I tripped on my own shoelace. Mr. Nawala laughed and let me put on one of the really scary monster costumes he made for a new horror movie. Wait till you see it. It will give you nightmares forever. Boo! I scared Mr. Nawala, and we both laughed. He let me keep the costume on and walk me back home so I could frighten my mom and dad. Boy, were they scared. Say, were you wondering if Nawala was really Mr. Nawala's real name? I did too. So I asked him. Mr. Nawala smiled and said, I thought a smart person like you would have figured out that Nawala is Halloween spelled backward. The end.
Ooh, that was good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, that was wonderful. Wonderful performance.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's fun. I like telling spooky stories. Whenever I read them to children, I especially like sharing them because they know that they're in a safe place with someone who loves them, and getting that fun feeling in your tummy of, oh, something spooky, something bad might happen, but they know that they're safe and we're just having fun. And that's a fun feeling.
Oh, yeah. And they can enjoy like being scared and enjoying the spook without having the actual terror.
And for littles, it doesn't have to be violent and creepy and horrific. It's the thematic tension that is really exciting and fun.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For that. And you've got a second one.
I do. I'm going to read The Stranger by Chris Van Allsburg, which is perfect for this time of year, especially on a day like today, when I'm looking out the window and the leaves and the trees, they're just blowing and blowing, and you need that sweater on.
Oh, yes.
Or blanket.
Oh, yeah. This is like my favorite weather.
Well, then I think you'll really like this one.
Ooh.
The Stranger. It was the time of year Farmer Bailey liked best, when summer turned to fall. He whistled as he drove along. A cool breeze blew across his face through the truck's open window, and then it happened. There was a loud thump. Mr. Bailey jammed on his brakes. Oh no, he thought, I've hit a deer. But it wasn't a deer the farmer found lying in the road. It was a man. Mr. Bailey knelt down beside the still figure, fearing the worst. But then suddenly, the man opened his eyes, and he looked up with terror and jumped to his feet. He'd tried to run off, lost his balance, and fell down. He got up again, but this time the farmer took his arm and helped him to the truck. Mr. Bailey drove home. He helped the stranger inside, where Mrs. Bailey had made him comfortable on the parlor sofa. Katie, their daughter, peeked into the room. The man on the sofa was dressed in odd, rough leather clothing. She heard her father whisper, must be some kind of hermit, sort of fellow who just lives alone in the woods. But the stranger didn't seem to understand the questions Mr. Bailey had asked him. I don't think, whispered Mrs. Bailey, he knows how to talk. Mr. Bailey called the doctor, who came and listened to the stranger's heart, felt his bones, looked in his eyes, and took his temperature. He decided the man had lost his memory. There was a bump on the back of his head. In a few days, the doctor said, he should remember who he is and where he's from. Mrs. Bailey stopped the doctor as she left the house. He'd forgotten his thermometer. You can throw that out, he answered. It's broken. The mercury is stuck at the bottom. Mr. Bailey lent the stranger some clean clothes. The fellow seemed confused about buttonholes and buttons. In the evening, he joined the Baileys for dinner. The steam that rose from the hot food fascinated him. He watched Katie take a spoonful of soup and blow gently across it, and then he did exactly the same. Mrs. Bailey shivered. Brr, she said. There's a draft in here tonight. The next morning, Katie watched the stranger from her bedroom window. He walked across the yard toward two rabbits. Instead of running into the woods, the rabbits took a hop in his direction. He picked one of them up and stroked its ears and then set it down. The rabbits hopped away and then stopped and looked back as if they expected the stranger to follow. When Katie's father went into the fields that day, the stranger shyly tagged along. Mr. Bailey gave him a pitchfork, and with a little practice, he learned to use it well. They worked hard, and occasionally Mr. Bailey would have to stop and rest, but the stranger never tired. He didn't even sweat. That evening, Katy sat with the stranger, watching the setting sun. High above them, a flock of geese in perfect V formation flew south on the trip that they made every fall. The stranger couldn't take his eyes off the birds. He stared at them like a man who'd been hypnotized. 2 weeks passed, and the stranger still could not remember who he was. But the Baileys didn't mind. They liked having the stranger around. He'd become one of the family. Day by day, he'd grown less timid. "He seems so happy to be around us," Mr. Bailey said to his wife. "Hard to believe he's a hermit." Another week passed. Farmer Bailey couldn't help noticing how peculiar the weather had been. Not long ago, it seemed that autumn was just around the corner, but now it still felt like summer, as if the seasons couldn't change. The warm days made the pumpkins grow larger than ever. The leaves on the trees were as green as they'd been 3 weeks before. One day, the stranger climbed the highest hill on the Bailey farm. He looked to the north and saw a puzzling sight. The trees in the distance were bright red and orange, but the trees to the south, like those around the Baileys, were nothing but shades of green. They seemed so drab and ugly to the stranger. It would be so much better, he thought, if all the trees could be red and orange. The stranger's feelings grew stronger the next day. He couldn't look at the tree's green leaves without sensing that something was terribly wrong. The more he thought about it, the more upset he became, until finally he could think of nothing else. He ran to a tree and pulled off a leaf. He held it in his trembling hand and, without thinking, blew on it with all his might. At dinner that evening, the stranger appeared dressed in his old leather clothes. By the tears in his eyes, the Baileys could tell that their friend had decided to leave. He hugged them all once and then dashed out the door. The Baileys hurried outside to wave goodbye, but the stranger had disappeared. The air had turned cold, and the leaves on the trees were no longer green. And every autumn since the stranger's visit, the same thing happens at the Bailey farm. The trees that surround it stay green for a week after the trees to the north have turned. And then overnight they change their color to the brightest of any tree around. And etched in frost on the farmhouse windows are the words that say, "See you next fall."
Ooh, I like that.
You'll definitely want to look at the illustrations in that book because they're beautiful.
Oh,
Just as beautiful as the changing leaves.
Ooh. My goodness, the artwork is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Chris Van Allsburg has always been a favorite of mine.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know The Polar Express and Jumanji.
Oh, yes.
That's the same author and illustrator.
Wow. Oh. My goodness, these are amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you for coming over and reading those to us.
You're welcome. I don't know if they were as spooky as you wanted them to be, but it's what I had to offer.
Hey, that's more than enough. That's more than enough. And I enjoyed them, and I'm sure that my listeners will too when they hear this.
Good.
So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed Shannon's stories. I know I did when I listened to them. Now, before we continue on with the episode, I would like to say as I was saying, I would like to say thank you for tuning in and for taking time out of your day to join me on this most frightful, sacred, and thin veiled night of the year. It is truly my favorite Sabbath, and I hope that it has been an enjoyable time for you, for it has been for me. Now, there are some things I wish to read to you. I have two poems. The first poem I'm reading is the poem that Tim Burton wrote in his days as a Disney animator that was the basis of the Nightmare Before Christmas film. The poem was later made into a storybook with illustrations. And without further ado, here we go. It was late one fall in Halloween land, and the air had quite a chill. Against the moon a skeleton sat, alone upon a hill. He was tall and thin, with a bat bow tie. Jack Skellington was his name. He was tired and bored in Halloween land. Everything was always the same. I'm sick of this scaring, the terror, the fright. I'm tired of being something that goes bump in the night. I'm bored with leering my horrible glances, and my feet hurt from dancing their skeleton dances. I don't like graveyards, and I need something new. There must be more to life than just yelling, "Boo!" Then out from a grave, with a curl and a twist, came a whimpering, whining, spectral mist. It was a little ghost dog with a faint little bark and a jack-o'-lantern nose that glowed in the dark. It was Jack's dog, Zero, the best friend he had, but Jack hardly noticed, which made Zero sad. All that night, through the next day, Jack wandered and walked. He was filled with dismay. Then deep in the forest, just before night, Jack came upon an amazing sight. Not 20 feet from the spot where he stood were three massive doorways carved in wood. He stood before them, completely in awe, his gaze transfixed by one special door. Entranced and excited, with a slight sense of worry, Jack opened the door to a white, windy flurry. Jack didn't know it, but he'd fallen down and in the middle of a place called Christmas Town. Immersed in the light, Jack was no longer haunted. He had finally found the feeling he wanted. And so that his friends wouldn't think him a liar, he took the presents filled stockings that hung by the fire. He took candy and toys that were stacked on the shelves, and a picture of Santa with all of his elves. He took lights and ornaments and the star from the tree, and from the Christmas town sign he took the big letter C. He picked up everything that sparkled or glowed. He even picked up a handful of snow, but he grabbed it all and without being seen, he took it all back to Halloween. Back in Halloween, a group of Jack's peers stared in amazement at his Christmas souvenirs. For this wonderful vision, none was prepared. Most were excited, though a few were quite scared. For the next few days, while it lightened and thundered, Jack sat alone and obsessively wondered. Why is it they get to spread laughter and cheer, while we stalk the graveyards, spreading panic and fear? Well, I could be Santa, and I could spread cheer. Why does he get to do it year after year? Outraged by injustice, Jack thought and he thought. Then he got an idea. Yes, yes, why not? In Christmas Town, Santa was making some toys, when through the din he heard a soft noise. He answered the door, and to his surprise, he saw weird little creatures in strange disguise. They were altogether ugly and rather petite, and as they opened their sacks, they yelled, "Trick or treat." Then a confused Santa was shoved into a sack and taken to Halloween to see Mastermind Jack. In Halloween, everyone gathered once more, for they'd never seen a Santa before. And it was and as they cautiously gazed at this strange old man, Jack related to Santa his masterful plan. "My dear Mr. Claus, I think it's a crime that you've got to be Santa all of the time. But now I will give presents and I will spread cheer. We're changing places. I'm Santa this year. It is I who will say Merry Christmas to you. So you may lie in my coffin, creak doors, and yell boo. And please, Mr. Claus, do not think ill of my plan, for I'll do the best Santa job that I can." And though Jack and his friends thought they'd do a good job, their ideas of Christmas were still quite macabre. They were packed up and ready on Christmas Eve day when Jack hitched his reindeers to his sleek coffin sleigh. But on Christmas Eve, as they were about to begin, a Halloween fog slowly rolled in. Jack said, "We can't leave. This fog's just too thick. There'll be no Christmas, and I can't be Saint Nick." Then a small glowing light pierced through the fog. What could it be? It was Zero, Jack's dog. Jack said, "Zero, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?" And to be so needed was Zero's great dream, so he joyously flew up to the head of the team. And as the skeletal sleigh started its ghostly flight, Jack cackled, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." 'Twas the nightmare before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was peaceful, not even a mouse. The stockings all hung by the chimney with care, when opened that morning would cause quite a scare. The children, all nestled so snug in their beds, would have nightmares of monsters and skeleton heads. The moon that hung low over the new-fallen snow cast an eerie pall over the city below. And Santa Claus' laughter now sounded like groans, and the jingling bells like chattering bones. And what to their wondering eyes should appear but a coffin sleigh with skeleton reindeer, and a skeletal driver so ugly and sick they knew in a moment this can't be Saint Nick. From house to house, with a true sense of joy, Jack happily issued each present and toy. From rooftop to rooftop, he jumped and he skipped, leaving presents that seemed to be straight from a crypt. Unaware that the world was in panic and fear, Jack merrily spread his own brand of cheer. He visited the house of Susie and Dave. They got a Gumby and Pokey from the grave. Then on to the home of little Jane Neiman. She got a baby doll possessed by a demon, a monstrous train with tentacle tracks, a ghoulish puppet wielding an axe, a man-eating plant disguised as the reef, and a vampire teddy bear with very sharp teeth. There were screams of terror, but Jack didn't hear. He was much too involved with his own Christmas spirit. Jack finally looked down from his dark, starry frights and saw the commotion, the noise, and the light. Why, they're celebrating! It looks like such fun! They're thanking me for the good job I've done. But what he thought were fireworks, meant as goodwill, were bullets and missiles intended to kill. Then amidst the barrage of artillery fire, Jack urged Zero to go higher and higher. And away they all flew, like the storm of a thistle, until they were hit by a well-guided missile. And as they fell, on the cemetery, and as they fell on the cemetery, way out of sight, was heard, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Jack pulled himself up on a large stone cross, and from there he reviewed his incredible loss. "I thought I could be Santa. I had such belief." Jack was confused and filled with great grief. Not knowing where to turn, he looked toward the sky. Then he slumped on the grave and he started to cry. And as Zero and Jack lay crumpled on the ground, they suddenly heard a familiar sound. "My dear Jack," said Santa, "I applaud your intent. I know wreaking such havoc was not what you meant, and so you are sad and feeling quite blue. But taking over Christmas was the wrong thing to do. I hope you realize Halloween's the right place for you. There's a lot more, Jack, that I'd like to say, but now I must hurry, for it's almost Christmas Day." Then he jumped in his sleigh, and with a wink of an eye, he said "Merry Christmas" and bid them good-bye. Back home, Jack was sad, but then, like a dream, Santa brought Christmas to the land of Halloween. The end. And finally, the last thing I have for you, my dear friends, is another poem. This one is titled Samhain by Anne Finch, The Celtic Halloween. In the season leaves should love, since it gives them leave to move. Through the wind towards the ground, they were watching while they hung. Legend says there is a seam, stitching darkness like a name. Now when dying grasses veil earth from the sky in one last pale wave, as autumn dies to bring winter back and then the spring, we who die ourselves can peel back another kind of veil that hangs among us like thick smoke. Tonight at last I felt it shake. I feel the nightmare stretching away, thousands long behind the days, till they reach the darkness where all of me is ancestor. I move my hand and feel a touch. Move with me. Feel a touch move with me, and when I brush my own mind across another, I am with my mother's mother. Sure as footsteps in my waiting self, I find her, and she brings arms that carry answers for me, intimate and awaiting bounty. Carry me, she leaves this trail, through a shudder of the veil and leaves, like amber where she stays, a gift of her perpetual gaze. And that was the poem Samhain by Annie Finch. And I wish you all a blessed and sacred Samhain, as well as a happy Halloween. I almost said happy holiday, but happy Halloween. I hope that you all enjoyed this spooky episode. I hope I gave you a little bit of a scare. I am sorry for stumbling a bit while reading the poems, but I'm not used to reciting poetry out loud. I'm sure you can forgive such a blunder. Anyway, have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next episode of the Every Which Way podcast. Bye. This is Halloween, this is Halloween, 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 Halloween. In this town we call home, everyone hail to the pumpkin song. Against the moon a Sultan scat. Scat.